Welcome to the Iferia TechCast. Here we bring you all things science, engineering, technology, and innovation. Today we are joined by Makeda Boehm, a tech sales leader who has personally earned over $1 million in sales and used that success to build a radically different life. She's a homesteading mom who lives mortgage free on 10 acres and is the founder of Seed and Society. She calls herself the Chief Action Officer and she teaches how to build what she calls sovereignty systems, blending tech income with land-based wealth to create genuine freedom. In this episode, we'll explore the practical systems behind her unique journey from high-tech sales to building a self-sufficient homestead. So, Makeda, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate it.
I am excited to have you here today. So, quickly, let's dive in. Your journey is incredible from being on your own at 16 to becoming a $1 million tech sales leader and now building a 10-acre mortgage-free homestead. So, what was the defining moment for you that made you decide to pursue sovereignty over a traditional linear career path?
Yeah, absolutely. For me, it's super easy. I became a mom. And when I became a mom, it just became very obvious that I was no longer only responsible for myself. Not that you ever are, right? Like you're a citizen
Mm,
of the world. But when you have children, it becomes very visceral and very real very quickly that you brought this human into the world. It is your responsibility to take care of them. And I often say forever. And that's not saying I need to financially support you or baby you, but I'm saying that even when you're 30, even when you're 50, God willing, and me still here, that I should be your soft place to land, that I should be your direction into what a good life can look like. And for me, it was very important to make sure that we focused on real, tangible things like the land and engagement and time spent rather than just money. So that's what made it very clear for me.
fantastic. That's a really incredible empathy-driven journey for you. Really inspiring. So you call yourself the Chief Action Officer. So, what does that title mean to you in practice? And how does that mindset differ from the quote unquote hustle culture that so many entrepreneurs get trapped in?
Absolutely. That's a great question. So I am the chief action officer, and I call myself this because I have a framework called the connector method, which is all about fast action is what leads to evidence, which
Mm,
then leads to confidence, which gives you consistent, incredible results. And what I mean by that is doing the thing is always going to be better than talking about doing the thing. You
mm,
can, especially in the age of AI, I'm sure we'll talk about it. We're in the age of information. However, implementation is where the magic happens. It's what are you actually doing with it versus the theory of sitting up there. So that's why I call myself Chief Action Officer because my entire life is a study of taking fast action to get from where I am to where I wanted to be. And it's fundamentally different from hustle culture. And I've been a victim of hustle culture. I've been guilty of it as well. And Seed in Society, I founded it literally to almost be anti hustle culture. It really is about taking that time to breathe, to build intentionally with your family, with your life, to actually take time to think, what do I really want? Versus, am I just checking off boxes and doing things because society told me that I should hit whatever arbitrary goal by this arbitrary time? a main point of it being anti-hustle culture is we often talk about retiring early, not waiting until you're 65 or 72, which is really common in America for you to work until you're 65 or 72, and then you get your retirement and then you get your time back. I'm all about making a life now where you're spending your time doing the things that matter to you, that create impact for you, so that you can make the results you want in the world and not waiting for some magical number that someone else told you to.
All right, that's really interesting. So, Makeda, I am fascinated by the intersection of high-tech sales and homesteading. So, what does your tech stack for running a homestead and a business actually look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. I actually have like a guide about this for capacity because I live in tech. So I work from home and I work in tech, but I also live in a town with no stoplights. I live in a
Mm,
town of a population of under 3,000 people. Like, it is
wow.
a very tiny town, and I've lived in some of the biggest cities in the country as well. So I'm very aware of the juxtaposition, but my tech
Mm,
stack obviously looks like, well, I won't say obviously. I'm teaching people this now and I realize it's not obvious. Of course, I have ChatGPT and creating my GPTs. I also use Claude. Like, those are like daily just go-tos because they're just really, they kind of cover a lot of stuff. I love Perplexity. I think about that as like search or Google on steroids. Although I also like Gemini, and they've really come out with
Google on
really great
steroids. I
photo
like that.
editing. I think everyone has their lane, like what they do very well, but also just looking at from like a gamma perspective, right? Like gamma AI is incredible to me, especially if you're creating any type of presentations or documents, how it happens. They just released like the AI updates right within it, and you can do like a lot more of the edits, and it's a little bit more native. Um, I will go down like having the Comet browser or Atlas, which I'm playing around with now, the new AI native browsers. But those are kind of like my basics. Of course, there is AI functionality integrated in other parts of my tech stack that I use. But if you have, in my opinion, ChatGPT and Claude, you could kind of do anything, especially if you're building some artifacts or some GPTs or starting to train some agents.
Fantastic, fantastic.
Yeah.
So, I have a lot to say concerning your last response. So, how do you use AI and automation to manage everything from crop rotations to client pipelines? I mean, you mentioned a whole lot of AI tools from ChatGPT to Claude to Gemini to Perplexity, which you mentioned as the Google on steroids. So, these AI tools are quite distinct. You even mentioned about Comet and Atlas. So, I mean, most of these tools, some of these tools you mentioned, the LLMs like ChatGPT, Gemini, Perplexity. So, which do you use for which kind of specific task? Or is it that you stick to one, or you have some certain task you use ChatGPT for, you have some certain task you use Perplexity for? You understand? I like to, go into some subtle details about how you actually use these AI tools.
Yeah, I love this question. My husband is tired of me talking about this. I can start to talk about it a lot. So, even when I started my homestead this year, and we did about 10 garden beds, we did a no till 60 by 4 long garden bed where I did like a whole bunch of okra and I planted potatoes. And then I did, even in that planning, I used AI. Of course, I did like a gardener mentorship program, which I think that's really the important part of AI. It doesn't replace humans, it helps to augment your reality. And it's still important, I think, to get perspective and get coaching or go to somebody who understands that field. However, a lot of times we don't even know what we don't know. We don't even know what questions to ask. And that is where AI comes in and really helps you with fast action. for me, example, I started a podcast in May. I listened to podcasts before. I had no idea what equipment, what software. I use Riverside FM, and their AI tools are able to come in and just quickly clean up my audio. I'm not in a
Yeah.
sound treated room. I don't have the fanciest microphone, but my audio sounds pretty good. My video looks pretty good. I'm able to have different angles, like literally the integration of AI in that way. But back to your question, Claude, for example, I'm really big with projects in Claude, and I use Claude for consistency. So if anyone uses ChatGPT, which I'm sure is a lot of the world's population, you know that you can put in an answer there and it'll give you back a slightly different answer every time. It's not always super consistent. Claude, which was actually founded by folks who left OpenAI early on, Claude is just a little bit more consistent with the output that it's giving you. And it does allow you to give it a lot more of like those project files to then
Mm.
build on. ChatGPT is still my number one to go to. I feel like it gives you the most information for the price. If anyone uses Claude, you know that it will run out. You will be told to wait for 5 hours or upgrade to a $200 plan. But ChatGPT is really good as well for making sure it's taking information from all the things you're doing within the instance. It's also really good with being able to build your custom GPTs and your projects. So you can have, for example, I have like a brand writing GPT, or I have a GPT around like the seed and society ecosystem. So I don't have to keep telling it about my business. I don't have to keep telling it about how I'm developing it. I can tie it to my Google Docs or whatever documents that I want to and expand in that way. So I do use them slightly differently. My favorite thing to do, though, is to take the response from ChatGPT and put it in the Claude and put
Mm.
Claude's response into ChatGPT and to keep iterating on whatever issue or problem or whatever solution I'm trying to come to. So I think the really cool thing about LLMs is especially in this format is that you can continue to iterate. And I think a lot of times people get the answer and stop there as opposed to going deeper and iterating, even if you have to turn on voice mode and just speak about it a lot more like how you would talk about it, and then getting that feedback. But the more you train these models, the better the results it can give you. And then sometimes I'll take both and throw it into Gemini and see what they tell me too. So it's fun.
Fantastic. So you talk about taking the output from one LLM and imputing it into another LLM. So why do you do that? Is there a particular reason?
Yes, because they will give you different answers. Sometimes, though, which I'm noticing more, which lets me know that I'm kind of more aligned, is that sometimes they give very similar answers, which is like, okay, this is the path forward with these sets of goals that you're trying to achieve, or this ending outcome. And I think that that's a really important detail when you are going into LLMs or you are trying to create something. You should need to know, at least generally, where you're trying to go. What goal are you trying to achieve? What is your endpoint for this particular activity? I think where a lot of things can get very confusing is when you don't even know what it is that you're trying to achieve and you just go in there and you're asking AI to think for you. And it really is a mirror. The more you put into any of these LLMs, it really is almost a microcosm of you and how you think. And you can tell it like, hey, take off the blind spots. What aren't you telling me? Be a strategist for 25 years. Am I being too optimistic about this? What are the real what's the real revenue opportunity here? What does the market look like for this? Like, you can get pretty granular in a way that even 2 years ago, you would have had to hire an entire team. You would have had to get a focus group in. You would have had to look through these 400 pages reports of what the market actually looks like, what revenue it's actually generating, and now you can get that at the snap of a finger. But again,
Mm,
that's why I call myself the chief action officer, because none of this information matters if you do nothing with it. And that's where the human engine comes in. And to even take it back a little, Ezekiel, when I'm talking about like using AI, it doesn't even need to be that difficult, especially when I talk to moms. I see it in society is really for ambitious moms, intentional parents who are trying to create capacity, cash flow, and confidence. Have it do your meal planning for a week. Take a picture of
mm,
your fridge and say, these are the ingredients I have. Give me 5 meals from it. Or what can I do based on these allergies? We're a family that has a lot of food allergies, and it's different needs for different folks in this house. You can even use ChatGPT again when I'm doing my gardening and I'm like, okay, well, what's a good companion plant? I don't want to plant beans in the same garden bed as tomatoes, but basil would go great with tomatoes. Things like
mm.
that when you need a split second decision and you're out there and it's like, oh, let me check here. That's how I often teach people how to get comfortable with AI when it's like it doesn't have to be this crazy tech stack. I'm not telling you to go vibe code. I'm not telling you to go develop an entire app. But what can it do for your workout plan? Can it give you a workout plan? Yes, it can in 10 minutes. And there you go.
Fantastic. Thanks for sharing that, Makeda. So, moving forward, for the engineers and systems thinkers listening, what is one practical, actionable system that you've built for your homestead or business that others could replicate to buy back their time and mental energy?
Absolutely. So mental energy is the really important part. I think even just from a workflow perspective, like if you have to do any kind of follow up with clients, if you have to do any kind of outreach, that becomes very manual after a time. And it's a process that can be automated. Of course, you want to still have some human oversight to it, especially from a personalization perspective. But any of these LLMs that you're using, for example, at work, I use like Copilot, which basically runs off of ChatGPT or whatever. It does start to learn your tone and your voice. And again, remembering what your ultimate goal is for this task. And I'm a
Mm,
big fan of projects. You can basically set up a project for almost anything that you do repeatedly. I'm a big fan of systems, creating either standard operating procedures if you're going to start a business, or if you are in tech, or you're in the product team, or you're in the marketing team or the dev team, right? A lot of these things you're doing over and over again. Have AI do it for you. You don't need to sit there and take 2 months now to write the standard operating procedures for this new product that's releasing. As you do it, put those documents in as long as your company supports it. I'm not telling you to go rogue and put it into any commercial AI, but whatever one that your company actually supports, put it in there and have ChatGPT write out the SOPs or whatever LLM you're using, and then you go back over it and make sure it's hitting the points that you want it to hit. But I think that we vastly underestimate how amazing having an outline is. And I don't know how many millennials are on here, or like who did college a decade ago or 2 decades ago. Like it would take you the whole day to write your outline for your paper. Like you're you're sitting there and you're doing this manually because it's the only way it could be done. And I don't underestimate or don't minimize how important of a skill that is. I think that with AI, you really can only use it as well as your knowledge is. So you still should be growing yourself, and you still should be connecting with other humans and seeing other perspectives, because it can become an echo chamber. But anything that you're doing manually, like writing emails, doing outreach, writing standard operating procedures, writing copy, whether you're doing the marketing side of whatever, writing code, it's just we're in a new age now. You don't need to sit there and do that manually. And I have a master's certificate in data science. I've sat there and played around in Python and wrote around in R. And it's just, even 4 years ago, what we can do now today is amazing. And you should be paying attention to how to practically apply AI and not necessarily getting so lost in the weeds that you then don't even know how to make it work for the average person.
All right. So, Makeda, you've earned over $1 million in tech sales while raising two young kids and building a homestead. So, what does productivity mean to you in this context?
Yeah, that's a great question. I am a person who I have a love-hate relationship with the word productivity, because I feel like a
Okay.
lot of times, but the reason why is because I feel like a lot of times we tie productivity to doing more, right? It's this
Hmm.
idea that, you know, if and and to be even more specific, to doing more with work. But for me, I feel like I'm super productive when I'm able to sit down with my children and ask how their day was. And I'm not looking at my phone, and I'm not checking emails, and I'm not being on another meeting. I think that that's productive too. But how we tend to talk about it conventionally, that's not counted in there. It's just how much were you able to get done. And I think the cool thing about AI, and just why I've decided to be intentional with the homestead and be intentional with my life in general, is that it allows you to get back to real life if you're able to set up systems and set up automations that do a lot of that manual work that you used to have to do in the background. And I want to be very clear here. I don't think this is your audience, but I know there's people who are thinking of it, which is like AI will take jobs, that it's the end of XYZ. And I'm not discounting that. But I think if you look at history, any technology that comes out, whether it was the engine, whether it was the steam engine, whether it was electricity, whether it was cell phones or telecommunications, right? Every
Yeah.
technological revolution or every invention is usually made to replace some type of manual task that humans are doing. Usually that was unsafe before, right? Like being in like factories, for example, all day in unsafe conditions. What I want people to also look into is how many jobs AI can create, how many businesses, how many income streams, especially now. Right now, we're at the gold rush stage. I don't think all this information and all this technology is going to be available en masse in the ways that it is now for much longer. A great example of that is when ChatGPT released its photo generation software. And we saw how wild that went for 2 days, and also the lawsuits that came from it, especially if you were doing
Hmm.
like Studio Ghibli, different, right? Like different
Yeah.
animation styles. And then you went back in and you're like, you can get spirited away. Let me try to get, I don't know, a birth card or something with this animation style. And it was like, nope, this violates our terms. Very quickly, just as quickly as it's been given, it can be taken away. And that is why I teach asset based wealth. That is what the homestead is about. That is what being in commune with your home and with your land is about. Because if any of this goes away, did you create a solid foundation? And by solid foundation, I mean drinking water, the ability to grow your own food, the ability to have somewhere to live if that for some reason becomes unavailable. And that's why I use it to support both. This is my digital income streams. This allows me to have more runway while also building a very solid, just a solid foundation, like from real assets. And I know you've touched on this. So I am an enterprise account executive. I've worked for various tech companies selling software. So I'm very familiar within that realm. In the past 5 years or so, I've sold nearly $10 million in software. And my commission from that was nearly 7 figures. So I'm not saying this from a position of just like being out of touch. Like I am in tech every day. I do understand
Yeah,
tech. I love tech, but I also chose a very unconventional path from someone who earns what I do and works where I do to also be very consciously in commune with the land because land is wealth. Yeah.
fantastic. So, can you share a story of a failure or perhaps a major setback in your homesteading or business journey? So, I don't know if there is any such, experience for you, but if there is, what did that
Absolutely.
experience teach you? All right, so what did that experience teach you about resilience and problem solving that your successes never could?
Absolutely love this question. It's something I talk about. I feel like I don't talk about it as much as I need to. First, anyone who has started anything, whether it's a side hustle, a business, a weekend project, crafts, you know that starting and doing the thing is usually very different from theory. And again, that's why I call
Yeah,
myself chief action officer, because you can go to school for 10 years on something, but anything that requires you to go to school for 10 years also requires you to do clinicals or do in class teaching because you can read about something as much as you want. You can watch as many YouTube videos as you want to, and it will not make you that person like the experience, like actually doing it. Whether, I don't know, you want to read about like a all-star track athlete and you watch all the videos about how to run and this is what they do. When you get on that field, you won't just be an all-star track athlete because you've learned all the information about what it takes to do that. However, you have set yourself up in a way to probably optimize to do it sooner. But nothing replaces it like doing it because then you could also go out to do it, start running and be like, I hate running. I actually don't even want to do this. And what I learned from my homestead, especially, is resilience and is patience. Because as much as I studied it and I wanted to know, okay, if I plant this here and this here, then that means that the pests should avoid this thing and go for like the
mm,
basil. It's not what happened. I still got tomato hornworms. I still got different cabbage worms that tore up my cabbage, tore up my broccoli. I got different pest pressure. I've had deer come and destroy the entire squash garden. But the important thing I learned too from my homestead, which is why I'm so grateful for it, and even just a garden, even just planting one seed. If that is what you have at home and you want to get a little garden pot, and plant one thing that's edible is patience. No matter how much I
mm,
prepare and no matter how much you plant, it will not sprout a crop by tomorrow. And that's the same lesson for everything in life. But it's the consistency that gets you that outcome. It's the showing up every day, whether that's weeding, whether that's watering, whether that's, I don't know, adding some crop amendments or some soil amendments. Like it's the showing up every day. And that's the same thing with business. That's the same thing with parenting. That's the same thing with any goal you're trying to achieve. The difference between the people who complete it or achieve these great things is that they showed up every day, even when it was hard, even when it wasn't sexy, even when it looked like they weren't going anywhere, that they were just hitting this wall. One day that wall fell down and they were able to go to the next level. And yeah, I think nothing teaches you that quite as well as having a garden because nature will always win and it will humble you very quickly, but it also gives you perspective.
Fantastic. Part of the theme of this podcast is centered around innovation. So, for that reason, there is kind of like a common question I like to reserve for all the guests I interview on innovation. So, in your work, which blends cutting edge tech with timeless self sufficiency. So, what does the word innovation truly mean to you?
That is an interesting question. I think for me, innovation innovation is a little tricky, and I'll often recite this quote from Audre Lorde, the late great Audre Lorde, which is centered around African cosmology. My undergrad degrees are actually in African American studies and sociology. But it's this idea that there are no new thoughts or ideas, just different ways of expressing them. It is this
Hmm,
idea that a lot of times people swear like, "Hey, this is like no one's done this before." But as someone who has studied history from the start of civilization, literally when you're talking about 4,000, 5,000 BC, you realize that there really is no new thoughts or ideas, but those different ways of expressing them, that unique human aspect, that unique thing that you have that no one else can touch because no one else has your story, your set of experiences, your set of like culture and influences. That's the innovation. How do you make life work for you? And when you take it to that next level of how are you trying to help life work for other people? What impact are you trying to create? That's where innovation lies.
fantastic. That's indeed an innovative way to say or explain the meaning of the word innovation. So,
Very meta.
finally, great. For our listeners who are inspired to take action and learn more from your systems. So, like, where is the best place for them to go find your tools, your strategies, and your podcasts?
Absolutely. So, I do have seedandsociety.com. It is always good. You can start there. But honestly, if you have a LinkedIn, connect with me there. That is where I spend the most time. Makeda Boehm on LinkedIn. It's where you can get access to some of my newest tools. I do have like the 5 AI shortcuts to get back 15 hours of your week. I'll give that over to Ezekiel. Hopefully, he'll put that in the show notes to just sign up and be within my world. Of course, there's the newsletter. I have the Seed and Society podcast. But yes, start with seedandsociety.com, and that is how you'll find me.
Fantastic. I'll be sure to link all the CTAs you just mentioned to the show notes. So, yeah, that's really great. It's been a really insightful conversation with you, and I am truly honored and excited to have you here today.
Thank you. It was such a wonderful conversation. I appreciate you having me on.